Hi, it's me. I'm back for period 6, going over the APUSH period 6 HTS/essential review questions that you submitted along with your document sourcing. I try to make this one a faster video because I know the last few have been all going on 20 minutes and apparently nobody wants to watch SauersHour for 20 minutes. Actually, not even me. So I'll try to stick to the point, but you have to do your part, which is to go and get your period 6 questions, look over your answers, see if you've gotten all the important points. Because here's the thing, this test on the 15th is open notes, which means you can use whatever we go over today. You can use that on the test. And it will greatly benefit you to use your own notes without having to look up anything, because you don't have time to look up anything. I'm going to give you some tips and hints to be able to organize your notes in front of you, around you, while you're taking this test. I'm going to send you like a sample of what I would do if I were taking this test and I was able to use my notes. So that's all going to come. Just want to let you guys know that I feel your struggle. This sucks. This whole situation sucks. I can't stand this distance learning. I don't like this whole situation. In fact, I even wrote a song about the coronavirus. So hopefully I'm going to put it out on YouTube on my SauersHour maybe by the end of this week. Alright, so I gave you a couple hints on these questions. I'm just going to read you the answers that I would have come up with, and then you're going to check your own work. The first question is about comparing the issues of immigrants and farmers during the Gilded Age, the attempts that were made to improve their situations. So I started with the new immigrants. Corporations saw new immigrants as a source of cheap labor. And factory workers were paid very little. Remember, these new immigrants are coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. They congregated in urban areas, mostly in ethnic conclaves, people that with their own ethnic backgrounds. They worked in factories. They worked and lived in unsafe environments. Some of their situations included child labor. There was little government help or assistance because of the ideology of laissez-faire. Oversight, and also the ideology of social Darwinism. Eventually, they formed labor unions. Examples of this would be the Knights of Labor and the AFL. Of course, labor unions had their own issues and problems with the riots and the strikes and things like that, but that was a step in the right direction, the formation of labor unions. Farmers, their answer to the labor unions was farmers' alliances. They formed farmers' alliances like the Grange to stop the perceived abuses of banks and railroads. Their farms and their homes were being foreclosed on because they couldn't pay their debts. They created Granger laws, and eventually what became the Populist Party in the 1880s and the 1890s. And eventually in the 1890s, they ended up being incorporated into the Democratic Party. All right, and that took up their free silver. Remember the inflation, the fact that they wanted inflation to be able to pay off their debts. That's a big part of this time period. So to compare them, both were victims of an unfair system and found effective ways to fight back. In fact, I could use that as a good thesis statement. And then my proof would be what I just said. All right, the next question was about the continuity of the treatment of Native Americans. This is a continuity throughout history. There was not much change. Despite the Dawes Act of 1887, that's something that you should know about. That was a humanitarian policy that did not work because of the corruption of what they call the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the BIA, the government agency that was supposed to be helping Indians. Instead, they were profiting for themselves. So Indians still dealt with government corruption, broken treaties, harsh treatment by settlers. You had the situation at Yellowstone where they wanted to use that as the government wanted to use that as a tourist attraction, and so happens that Native Americans had lived there for generations. You also had the threat of the Ghost Dance, which led to the Battle of Wounded Knee, and it's just a continuation of going back to everything that's happened to Native Americans since colonization. There was a book, you probably should be familiar with this book. It's called A Century of Dishonor. It's by Helen Hunt Jackson. It's the Uncle Tom's Cabin for the Indians. So look that up. Look that book up, A Century of Dishonor. All right, the next one says the achievements made between the first and the second Industrial Revolution. The first one was during the antebellum period. The second was during the Gilded Age. Which one was more important in history? So I'm just going to list some of the important developments during each period. The antebellum period had the first Industrial Revolution. Was most known for the cotton gin, the beginning of the factory system, like even the Lowell girls. The building of roads and canals, the steam engine, the telegraph, and maybe most important of all, interchangeable parts. The second Industrial Revolution during the Gilded Age is the rise of industry, including the process of making steel to create a modern city, skyscrapers and bridges and things like that. The assembly line, which was going to lead to the development of the automobile. The telephone was created during this time, electricity, Thomas Edison's light bulb. So you were to say which one had more of an effect on our important to history. Well, it depends on your point of view. If you want to talk about social issues, you could say it could be the first Industrial Revolution because women worked outside the home for the first time in history. You could also say that the cotton gin created the need for more slaves after manumission had already been considered as somewhat freeing slaves, and now the cotton gin comes along and you need more slaves now to become more profitable if you're a southern slave owner. But then again, you could argue that either way, but you do have to have an argument. And then you also have to have a counter-argument. That's a good question for both an argument and a counter-argument. The next one says, compare the setbacks of women and African Americans during the time period which group made steps towards equality. I would say women had the continuity of separate spheres. They were not able to compete in the job market, in politics, in basically anything that was associated with the so-called man sphere. But they did continue the reforms of the Second Great Awakening. This time it was called the social gospel. Women were out in front of that. They still fought for suffrage. Remember Jane Addams in the settlement houses and Florence Kelley trying to end child labor and all that. That was during this time period. But still no suffrage rights during this period. Ended in 1898. Blacks got voting rights during Reconstruction, if you remember that, but their achievements were, or their voting rights and their freedoms and their equality was short-lived, because when Reconstruction ended, that's when all of the voting restrictions and the segregation policies started. So although some gains were made, you could say this for both minority groups, women and blacks, is that, despite some gains, they were still in this time period in a continuity of being second-class citizens. And the main issue or the main event of this period of time in history for blacks would have been Plessy versus Ferguson, which cemented the idea of segregation. Also, you could have mentioned, as far as reformers of the time period, remember the first early civil rights leaders, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. If you want to mention that, that's a good counterpoint. Then the last question says, you're analyzing the progressive era, political, economic, and social reforms and comparing it with another period of history. Just to right off the top of my head, I thought of the Pendleton Civil Service Act, which none of you, at least I saw, mentioned in your answer. The Pendleton Civil Service Act was in the 1880s as a backlash to the patronage system. They were considered to be the reformers. The stalwarts were considered to be the backers of the patronage or the spoil system. Hold on, my questions just went away. I'm going to be able to see the questions. And then after Garfield's assassination, remember the assassin said, now, I'm a stalwart and now I can get a government job or whatever based on patronage. And the next president, which was Arthur, just flipped the script and passed the Pendleton Civil Service Act. That is a political reform of the Gilded Age. Some other political reforms that remember the political machines of Boss Tweed and all of that. So the reforms are going to concern some of the abuses of those types of systems. So you have Muckrakers, you have Lincoln Steffens, you have Ida Tarbell, you have Jacob Riis, you have Ida B. Wells. So Muckrakers were a big, huge part of the progressive era. So make sure you know about Muckrakers. You have the idea that these reforms were a backlash to the abuses of the Gilded Age or the Second Industrial Revolution. You have the ICC, the Commerce Commission, the Sherman Antitrust Act. One of them was the ICC was about the railroads, and the Sherman Antitrust system was about monopolies. Government oversight for both of those corporations, even though it wasn't very well enforced, it was still like an outlier because most of the government oversight during this time period was laissez-faire. So those two agencies were the exception to the rule, but you should know about that. The ICC and the Sherman Antitrust Act. You had Teddy Roosevelt's progressive reforms. Teddy Roosevelt was a very progressive president. Remember the Food and Drug Administration was created under Teddy Roosevelt. You have the political reforms of initiative and referendum, where citizens could actually get issues on the ballot to be voted for. We talked about that in class. That gave citizens more input. Also the 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators. Let's see. You had settlement houses during this time. These were reformers. Jane Addams and the settlement houses. You had more push towards women's suffrage because during this time period and going a little bit forward, you had the NWSA, National Women's Suffrage Association, and the radicalization of women's suffrage, like Alice Paul, staging protests in front of the White House and then getting arrested and then going on hunger strikes. So really, and that continued. This progressive era is continuing into the early part of the 20th century. So this progressive era doesn't really end until like around 1920. So like after World War I. What time period in history could this be mostly compared to? Didn't see a lot of these answers, but it's the New Deal. It's FDR's New Deal. Okay, so this is common knowledge for APUSH. Is that the progressive era and the New Deal are often compared to each other. So if I were you, like for the test, I would concentrate on things that I could compare in history that are similar, that focus on some of the same issues. It's because the government started to accept responsibility for the economic welfare and safety of its citizens. And this is most often compared to programs of the New Deal, such as the banking regulations and Social Security to take care of the elderly and all of that stuff. So that is a really good thing to know. It's something that might come up on the test and often does. As far as the Dbqs, the ones that I've read, I know these were difficult questions. Some of them, I don't know why you chose the question about agricultural technology. We didn't spend a lot of time on that in class. Maybe you did it because of the documents. But your thesis, that's your argument. Okay, so your thesis is based on the prompt, which is what you are arguing. So if you're arguing about agricultural technology, that's what your argument has to be about. Also, there is a lack of outside information. Most everybody is writing just directly about the documents, sourcing the documents. That's fine. But during this open notes test, that's a good way to get flagged for, looking online or reading somebody else's essay or something like that. The best thing you guys can do is be prepared with your own notes to be prepared to take this test. Okay? As far as that goes, I guess that's all I have for today. I will get back with you when I am ready to do the Period 7 review. One more thing about the Dbqs and the open notes is that I'm going to help you guys organize your notes in a way that's going to be most beneficial to you during this test. Alright, so don't think you're going to be able to have time to look stuff up in Wikipedia and History.com and whatever else you guys have been using to do your work from me. It's not going to work for College Board. So let's, keep up with these videos and keep up with the work. And there's only one more period to go before the test, and then we'll be done. Okay? All right. See you next time.